Chapter 10, Data Collection. When you can measure what you're speaking about and express it in numbers, you know something about it, but when you cannot measure it, when you can express it in numbers, you knowledge it is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. It may be the beginning of knowledge, but you have secretly in your thoughts advanced to the stage of science. William Thomson Kelvin. Data is money. Our objective is to invest in data to support smarter business decisions. This chapter will help corporations avoid the usual foibles of data collection, which are, for the most part, form of inaction. 1. Failing to involve the proper statistical qualifications. 2. Overusing antidotal sampling. 3. Not leveraging interval estimation. 4. Maintaining a rigid census-taking mentality. 5. Failing to obtain a representative sample. 6. Not learning about measurement error. 7. Withholding data acquisition for unreasonable proof that it will add value. 8. Denying the non-response problem. 9. Not taking advantage of more advanced designs that will lower costs and add capabilities. 10. Failing to statistically validate results from observable data. The economic benefits and the avoidance of pitfalls justify delegating data collection to quant specialists who are typically expert leaders processing more specialized data training in DOS or DOE. They can deduce the most efficient designs, run smarter simulations, and find the minimum sample sizes, which are just likely to be smaller than expected. We collect data to estimate population values such as the mean, total, variance, and so on. We estimate locations like the mean using either point estimations or preferably interval estimates. For the purpose of a successful project, we must define the population of interest. This will avoid holes that will weaken our solutions. Passively collected data are often called observable data. We will compare this against 5 approaches for actively collecting data: census taking, antidotal sampling, DOS, design of samples, statistical sampling, DOE, design of experimentation, and simulation. We will describe the resulting 6 types of data and later juxtapose some of them. Number 1, observational. Running a business passively generates data that may or may not be complete and often have rough edges. Many statistical techniques are built for analyzing observational data. Most are referred to as data mining tools. In exploring the degree which the data are representative, we need to understand how the data are generated. This will provide a feel for the accuracy and reliability of the data. Statistical diagnoses are particularly important for observational data. Number 2, census taking. A census consists of measurements on every element in its population. In practice, consensual data are often collectively passively by conducting business. Yet there are many instances where we need to collect sensual data deliberately. When sensual data is measured accurately, we can use mathematical tools without making statistical assumptions. Otherwise, essential data is said to be measured with error. Statistical tools are built to analyze data measured with error. We can still use mathematical tools, but we will be making explicit or implicit statistical assumptions. For example, we might implicitly assume that the measurement error will not change the answer, or we might explicitly assume that we can get a reasonable answer by making some kind of adjustment. Number 3, antidotal sampling or non-representative sampling. These data are usually valuable because they generate insight into the possible, and they are usually conveniently collected. Despite claims to the contrary, the results are not intended to be directional or representative of the parent population. There is no design and no randomization. See randomization. Number 4, DOS, design of samples, or statistical sampling. The objective of drawing a statistical sample is to collect a representative set of observation that will support estimation. We employ a design so that every element in the population has a chance of selection. The design randomly selects elements from the population. The elements might be selected in a simple or complex fashion. A sample can trade completeness for accuracy and measurement. The secret to sampling is to know how to make the most of randomization. Sampling makes sense when we obtain more information relative to the cost. Number 5, DOE, design of experiment or experimentation. A controlled estimation of the relationships between a response-dependent variable and other explanatory independent variables called factors. The response measure performance, and for every DOE, at least one of the exploratory variables can be controlled. We control an exploratory variable by assigning different treatments to elements in the population. This is dictated by design. DOE is the most aggressive approach towards estimation and is the only way to solve the chicken and egg causal problems. Again, the secret is to know how to make the most of randomization. 6, simulation. Simulation leverages a model to generate outcomes data. The model simulates a business situation we are trying to understand. This is well understood and under-applied approach. It can be extremely challenging to build a relevant model. Also, we can regard DOE as a simulation model. This is the more important because some decision makers cannot abide by conducting an experiment, whereas conducting a simulation might be acceptable. When employing simulation, again, randomization plays an important role. Now we juxtapose pairs of these data types to clarify the most common misunderstandings. Antidotal sampling versus DOS. The difference is that an antidotal sample provides insight into the possible. A statistical sample is representative and provides insight into the probable. Each element in the DOS has a probability, not necessarily an equal probability of selection, and we can leverage this information to infer the shape of the overall population. In some situations, distinguishing between an antidotal sample and a representative one may require training. This is the same training required to understand the consequences. The most routine mistake is to depend on an antidotal sample to be representative. DOS versus census. A census is not always preferable. There are numbers of reasons for opting for a sample over a census. Number 1, greater simplicity. For many situations, it is difficult or impossible to conduct a census. Even government population census, upon which business make trillion-dollar decisions, are not usually complete censuses. Censuses usually have a non-response problem that makes them incomplete. This is solved by augmenting the partial census with a sample to represent non-responders. 2. Lower cost. A sample usually costs less, sometimes substantially less. Businesses waste incredible sums taking unnecessary census. A medium-sized corporation missed its opportunity to be the leader in measuring marketing impact based upon internet clickstream data. They canceled their lucrative contracts because they did not know how to make complex representative samples. 3. Greater accuracy. The smaller size of a sample can facilitate more accurate measurement of the elements in the population. It provides a better opportunity to address expected or unexpected difficulties. Number 4. Faster results. In some situations, fewer units take significantly less time to measure. 5. Greater repertoire. For those situations where a census is impractical, the choice is between obtaining the information through sampling or not at all. If there is a non-response problem, it might be easier to handle for a sample than for a census. DOE equals DOS plus manipulation to causal effects. DOS versus DOE. Both apply randomization to collect representative data, which can be leveraged for estimation. At the aggressive ends of both techniques, they require involvement and delegation to an expert leader or quant specialist, subject matter expert, with that particular training. At the advanced level, executing DOS or DOE requires specialized training within the specialized training of statistics. The difference between these two data collection techniques is that DOE facilitates influencing the information collected. Sampling techniques measure a representative subset of observations in order to estimate characteristics of the whole population. Experimentation measures a set of observation under what-if scenarios created by manipulating some exploratory variables called factors. By observing the corresponding effects due to these manipulations, we can infer cause and effect relationships. DOS randomly selects sampling units, SUs, to measure a multi-dimensional landscape as it naturally appears. DOE is a Rubik's Cube twist beyond observation alone. This twist is viewing possible landscapes created by intervention. We assign treatments to experimental units, EUs. Here each treatment level has a potential different effect on the response, and each articulates one possible landscape. DOS is like DOE with only a control group. While the terminology differs, there are several parallels between DOS and DOE. Table 10.1 shows the mirror of the data collection tools. DOS objective measure population, DOE objective measure effects. DOS SU sampling units, DOE EUs experimental units. DOS control only, DOE TREs treatments includes a control group. DOS randomly selects SUs to observe. DOE randomly assigns treatments to EUs and observe response. DOS strata homogeneous groups. DOE blocks homogeneous groups. DOS panels, a set of reusable SUs. DOE platforms, a set of somewhat reusable EUs. DOS stratify for known distinct subpopulation and adequately represents each. DOE block for known factors in order to neutralize their effects on the TRTs. Observational versus DOE. Observational data lack a design to control what we observe. Experimental data are collected in a manner that ensures repeatable results up to some point. In business, models tend to build on observational data. The modeling process must sort through patterns on the data to find those are likely to repeat in the future. The whole point of designing experiments is to control what we randomly observe. The design forces some degree of self-validation. Both observational data and results from DOE rely upon separate statistical diagnostics to measure performance. For observational data, there is a greater degree of creativity involved. For DOE, these techniques are almost built in. For many applications, the advantage of DOE requires training to discern. Randomization. Randomization protects us from subjective biases. Randomization self-validates the data. However, it can be thwarted by missing observations. For DOS, randomization consists of randomly selecting observation from a population. This facilitates better estimations by allowing all elements in a population to have probability of being selected in the sample. For DOE, randomization consists of randomly assigning treatments to the elements in a population. For simulation, randomization incorporates the out-of-control what-ifs. Randomization balances out unknown underlying factors. Randomization makes it possible for a sample to represent a population for an experiment on factor manipulations to infer causal relationships. For DOE, subjective bias is thwarted by randomly assigning treatments to experimental units. For DOS, this is accomplished by assigning probabilities to the elements in the population and mechanically selecting the sample. In antidotal sampling, there is no protection, no randomization. Randomization is the key ingredient that defines representative means of extracting information. Interval estimation equals point estimation plus parametric assumptions plus variance estimations. Interval and point estimation. One objective of collecting information is to estimate parameters, population characters such as the mean. On a regular basis, corporations make two mistakes in estimation. First, they overvalue estimates based on anecdotal data, and second, they use a point estimate when an interval estimate is wanted. The root causes for this mistakes are unwillingness to delegate and a lack of training. An interval estimate answers more questions than a point estimate. To illustrate, consider one commonly understood prediction, an election for public office. Suppose that the commentator on TV claims that the incumbent will receive 51% of the vote. The trained statisticians say that the incumbent is ahead of the challenger 51% to 48% with a bound of negative or positive or negative 3%. These are remarkably different answers. After about the second retelling, the former answers becomes the incumbent has won, while the latter answers will become the incumbent is leading, yet the results are uncertain. There are numerous trade-offs between a lone point estimate and one with an interval estimate wrapped around it. One, there is some expectation that the estimate will be close to the true value, which might later observe. In the fullness of time, we may lose credibility when point estimates repeatedly fail to be close enough. There is a risk in a misunderstanding that the most likely value, which might be represented by a point estimate, is not necessarily likely. 2. There is a greater finality with the interval estimate. A point estimate might appease some business needs without resolving it. We often return for another point estimate because the first one failed to keep the problem solved. 3. Multiple decisions. Suppose we want to choose between competing choices or to track choices over time. Interval estimates allow for fuller comparisons. 4. The width of the interval is excellent for comparing estimates and visualizing the information. 5. For advanced business problems, we will combine estimators into equations or base them conditionally upon one another. For those applications, confidence intervals are extremely helpful for simplifying the results, just not the calculations. There is something extreme about the need to always know the exact answer. This can be taken to the pathological point of self-deception. Interval estimation accepts and quantifies the incompleteness of our information. Return on data investment. Acquiring new data is a traditional stumbling block for corporations. There is some difficulty in foreseeing the future value of the data. While resistance has lessened over the years, there is still some reluctance to delegate to or at least involve the quant specialists who usually want more data. Their background in data analysis will offer certain advantages. 1, they are in better position to estimate the potential of the data. 2, they will set a reasonable burden on proving that the data will be a good investment. 3, they can better ascertain the requisite time horizon in collecting the data and delivering a return. 4, should the data collection involve statistical sampling or experimentation, they know how to leverage training in DOS and DO to lower cost. 5, they will place less emphasis on the charm in the old ways. Even with expertise, the data acquisition question can be informed guess. If the cost is reasonable, sometimes the right answer is to acquire the data and play with it. People work hard and will find unanticipated ways to leverage new data, the serendipity of statistics. If the cost is unreasonable, then statistical techniques might be able to lower the cost for a sample large enough to make comparisons. Measuring information. Data are measurements of on observations. As such, they are the product of measurement devices such as the yardstick or thermometer. The accuracy of the measurement is related to the measurement device and the data storage. Hence, continuous data are already run to the maximum precision that the measuring device and data storage can support. This is not a problem as long as we can meet our accuracy needs. There are several types of measurement devices, including questionnaires, direct observation, yardsticks, thermometers, machine monitorings, an assembly line, and so on. Sometimes people are a functional part of the measurement devices, other times data entry software plays this role. Every functional part of the measurement merits scrutiny. There was a large litigation between two major corporations that went badly for the plaintiff because the data entry software restricted the precision of the information. Hence, the plaintiff's data could not connect the defendant's product to particular failures. In understanding the measured device, we must reflect upon the business context. In practice, we are aggressive about pursuing the business contextual information. Missing values can represent a failure to measure, and other times they really are the measurements. For example, if amount of loan loss is missing, it could be because the loss amount was not entered in the computer or because the loan never defaulted. In the latter case, the value can be thought of at either zero or does not apply, whichever is more appropriate for pursuing the business objective. Measurement error. Another source of poor decision is from numbers measured with error, which have not been adjusted for the measurement error. Measurement error is created by the imprecision of the measurement device and or the storage device. This problem is routine in occurrence and sometimes only noticeable by the trained professional looking for the problem. Measurement error cannot be fixed by increasing the sample size. Consider the following yardstick example. Suppose that we need to infer which of the two identical buildings is taller. An extremely accurate laser-sighted device for measuring the height of buildings is not available. Instead, we are handed a yardstick and led to a window washer basket. If the buildings are very tall and extremely close in height, then the yardstick probably lacks the necessary precision to get the answer right on the single attempt. Each tumble of the yardstick could be off by the width of the pencil line. This is a simplistic example of the measurement error problem, which illustrates how decisions are exposed. The best way to thwart the measurement error problem is to recognize it before the data is wrongly collected. The best way to recognize this problem is to have an expert looking for it. Once a problem is recognized, we can fix the measurement and or storage devices if it's not too late. Otherwise, there are options for adjusting the estimation, yet there are few options for repairing the data. The coming sections are more detailed discussions of 4 basic data collection paradigms. Section 10.1, Observational and Sensual Data, No Design. Most data is observational, sensual in nature. This data will always play important roles in business analytics. Often, this data just appears as a consequence of regular business operations. This data might be less expensive on the front end because less planning is required, no design, no quant specialist. Now we'll discuss when to be wary of observational sensual data. We need to look for costs in the back end due to measurement error, to the data not being representative of the population, to using the wrong data just because it is there, and to collecting too much data when it is expensive. If the data are atypical of the population or collected with measurement error, then every subsequent analysis has this problem. Using data that is not representative of the population of interest can land a credibility to an anomaly which is actually more coincidence. All of these fooled by coincidence problems should be addressed with statistical diagnosis or better design for collecting the data. These can help us to avoid or correct biased estimates. We should not avoid planned data collection when it is appropriate. Observation and sensual data has become a crutch in some settings, keeping us from designing better ways to collect the data. Even when these concerns, observational sensual data are rich sources of often inexpensive information. Section 10.2, Methodology for Antidotal Sampling. Antidotal samples are actively collected within the benefit of statistical design. There is no randomization. No elements in the population have a zero probability of selection in an antidotal sample. The results are not intended to be directional or representative of the parent population. They provide insight into the possible rather than the probable. While this method is often misused, there are many valid situations that merit collecting anecdotal data, and there are techniques for obtaining the best antidote. To obtain the best anecdotal sample, there are 2 common selection paradigms, expert choice and quota samples. Expert choice leverages judgment to try to find a desired distribution, and quota sampling seeks the distribution that matches certain quotas. Both can be used for selecting focus groups. Such samples are not representative of an overall population because they do not provide every element in the population with the appropriate probability of being selected into the anecdotal sample. Expert choice. This method relies upon an expert to select what is important. It is excellent for finding interesting elements. Sometimes when experts try to pick an anecdotal sample to represent the whole population, they recognize and avoid selecting patterns that avoid non-random. Instead, they select representative subsets based on a pattern-less veneer. Randomization is blind to patterns. An expert might select a sample that has a random pattern, such as the ones in Figures 10.1. Behold, Figure 10.2 exhibits a possible random sample of 6 observations, which is unlikely to be selected by an expert because it does not look random. With regard to representing the shape of the parent population, expert choice is an attempt to randomly select without randomization. It is more appropriate for representing a population when a random sample is not possible. Quota samples. Quota sampling consists of assigning quotas to subgroups of elements in the population. Elements are non-randomly selected into each group until the quotas are filled. Quota samples are not representatives, and this leads to mayhem when we want to make estimates. Consider the case of Dewey defeats Truman, explained below. Dewey defeats Truman. In 1948, the cross-legal loop and Roper pre-election polls for the office of U.S. President were all based on quota sampling. They selected quotas of potential voters for demographic segments. For example, they might have selected a quota of 55 potential voters for the segment, say Hispanic middle-income females between 30 and 40 years old, and ask them for whom they will vote. This approach is usually better than the expert choice of predicting elections. In 1948, all 3 quota samples fit the 6 variable etc., of shape on the population very well, but unknown to the pollsters, one political party was overrepresented of the quota samples. That same year, the Washington State Public Opinion Laboratory conducted 2 of their own polls prior to the election, a probability sample and a quota sample. Only out of the 5 estimates, Washington State probability sample and the Washington State Crossley-Collop and Roper quota samples, only the probability sample predicted the correct outcome. Without this definite result, pollsters might still employ quota sampling today. Focus groups. Focus groups are selected using expert choice or quota sampling. They consist of a group of people who are asked their perceptions of a product or service in a group forum. That is, they can influence each other's response. It is part of their charm to get people to discuss the issues. Focus groups can generate great insights into the consumer's thinking. They are notable for screening or refining new product concepts. While extremely helpful, results from focus groups are not intended to be representative of the entire population. If we randomly select people for a group and do not let them influence each other's response, then we have a panel. Panels generate representative results. We reserve the term panel for statistical sampling, and we will discuss panels later. Corporations make the mistake of treating anecdotal samples as the accuracy peers or statistical samples. When leveraged to make population estimates, anecdotal samples require large additional assumptions. While anecdotal samples can provide insight into the possible, they are not designed for point or interval estimation. Estimations merit representative samples. The fact is generally misunderstood, and this is the scene of many tragic mishaps. Local custom is one common wrong reason for using anecdotal sampling. Another is that anecdotal sampling is often what we do when we do not know how to take a statistical sample. Section 10.3 DOS Design of Samples. However, the advantages of statistical samples do not outweigh the primary disadvantages, which include the need for additional training in statistics and the use of formal techniques to determine sample size, to select the sample, and to evaluate the results. Therefore, a properly executed application in non-statistical audit sampling will generally be the preferable approach. From an Audit Guidance Manual. There exists a great deal of ignorance about how easy and how important it is to design the sample. In many situations, there is a misconceived impediment to applying statistical sampling. A quant specialist has a training to design samples around many restrictions in a manner that accommodates the way in which the data is collected. There exists a great deal of ignorance about how easy and how important it is to apply statistical sampling. A quant specialist has the training to design samples around many restrictions in the manner in which the data is collected. Concept box. Sampling unit. A sampling unit comprises one or more elements from population SUs of the items of selection into a sample. For advanced designs, SUs can be inside larger SUs. Hence, we sample from within the SUs. Typical sampling units include household business units, customer payments, charges, et al. Representative samples generate representative interval estimates, our preferred objective. We want to design samples that provide accurate, striving for unbiased inferences about a population. The basic idea is to randomly select sample units, SUs, in a way that are effective, efficient, and yet representative. For difficult business problems one underutilized approach is to lead a DOS with a pilot test. The pilot test collects the information needed for building an effective sample design. Concept box. Sampling frame. A unique indexing of SUs, no dupes, no omissions, please. Usually this indexing consists of formal list of the SUs. A sampling frame might be a mailing list, a list of registered uses, a list of households on a content, and so on. Quant specialist roles. After delegation, the first phase for the quant specialist to tackle 6 interrelated questions. 1 is the business need. 2, what is the population? 3, what do we want with estimate? Typically, we want an interval estimate for a mean, total, or proportion of some population. 4, what is it worth? 5, how are we going to measure the sampling unit? 6, how can we build a sampling frame for this population? Usually this first phase of questions is either straightforward or already completed. If not, there is a need for a kickoff meeting and some investigation work. However, the quant specialist should avoid the mistake of taking anything for granted. For the grant specialist, we propose the following considerations for the process of taking a sample. 1. Kickoff meeting. Statement of objectives, population definition, measurement device. 2. Sampling frame. 3. Sample design. 4. Training for those involved. 5. Pilot test. 6. Data collection. 7. Data management. 8. Data analysis. 9. Presentation, business and or technical. 10. Analytics-based business decisions. Sample design. The purpose of the sample design is usually to estimate an interval around some population value. Within our cost and capability restrictions, accuracy, bias, and precision variance of the interval estimate are driving reasons for choosing the design. More often than not, estimating variance is the primary driver of the sample design decisions. The 2 basic sample designs are CRS, simple random sampling, and SYS, systematic sampling. More advanced techniques tend to be built on top of these 2 underlying basics. The key difference is that SRS leverages a formal sampling frame comprising a list of SUs, and SYS leverages an implied sampling frame based upon the relative positions of the SUs. Simple random sampling. The most basic, most popular, most widely overused sample design is simple random sampling alone. Each element is a population size n, has an equal probability of the selection lowercase n / uppercase n, where lowercase n is the sample size. This approach requires a sampling frame in the form of a list of sampling units. Each SU comprises 1 or more elements from the population. One approach is to 1. Obtain a constructed sampling frame. 2. Calculate the sample size needed for the desired accuracy. 3. Obtain the sample by randomly selecting an n SUs from the sampling frame without replacement. 4. Adjust for any difficulties such as non-response, discussed later. 5. Estimates the confidence interval. 6. Leverage the information to take action such as an analytics-based business decision. 7. Redesign the sample for next business objective. SRS always produces more representative information than antidotal sampling. The shortcoming with SRS relative to more advanced designs is that it makes no attempt to reduce costs or otherwise seize an advantage. Recall that there exists a little confusion regarding the appearance of simple random samples. Random samples do not necessarily look random. There is no requirement that the SUs be uniformly distributed in some representative shape. Up at the top, there is a box that says population, next sampling frame, next sample, next estimation, next analytics-based decision. Systematic sampling. A systematic sampling, on the other hand, consists of a set of regular spaced sampling units. The usual approach is to randomly select 1 element from the K elements and every KTH element thereafter. Systematic sampling is popular for QC, quality control problems. It is often employed for assembly lines because the elements cannot be listed in the type of sampling from SRS requires. For QC, the data arrives in sequence, and the sampling frame is a function of this arrival. Systematic sampling is the solution for certain big data problems, allowing us to sample the data as it arrives. Advanced sample designs. More advanced designs can go far beyond SRS and SYS in extracting information. We can select SUs at different rates from different subpopulation stratification, select heterogeneous groups of SUs clustering, select SUs of probabilities relative to some characteristics, probability and proportional to size, select SUs within SUs, and so on, hierarchically multiple stage designs, etc. Advanced sample designs can be more efficient in collecting data. Greater efficiency means lower cost for the same information. Suddenly, some additional business problems can now be solved affordably. The basic theme of sampling is that every observation needs to have a probability of selection to be represented by the sample. Hence, the non-response problem is a genuine impediment in accurately representing the population. The non-response problem. Non-response is a sampling term denoting missing sample. The non-response problem is one major impediment for a sample to the representative of the population. This population is particularly expensive in the business world because it is overlooked, and this results in questionable findings. It cannot be solved by increasing the sample size. To clarify the matter, suppose we are interested in a population where 25% of the elements will respond ones and 75% of the elements will respond zeros, as in figure 10.3. Now, if we draw a sample, all of the observation will come from the smaller quarter of the population. Our sample represents only those customers who will respond. Suppose that we ask the sample of customers whether they prefer brand A over the other brands. The best case is the respondables have the same preferences on average as the unsampled 75% of the population, the non-responders. The worst case is that responders will have vastly different preferences from these non-responders. Suppose that of the responders, 80% of them prefer brand A. If we assume that the responder preferences are identical to those non-responders, then a 95% of CI confidence intervals might look like this: 80% subtract or add or take away 8%, or 72%, 88% prefer brand A based upon a 25% response rate. Alternatively, an unassuming 95% CI is that 18%, 22% prefer brand A with 75% unknown or that. 18%, 97% prefer brand A. The last interval incorporates the fact that we do not know the preferences of the non-responders. All or none of them might prefer brand A. For the same 80% preference, had the non-response been 90% of the 75%, then the 95% CIs become 7.2%, 8.2 or 8.8% prefer brand A with 90% unknown, or 7.2%, 98.8% prefer brand A. In the example, a response rate of 10% was not helpful in estimating brand preferences. However, statistical solutions do have their detractors. When participants in my classes first see this example, they are astounded at the low response rate. However, I tell them that a 10% response rate is quite good. Other author. We too are astounded. While a 10% response might signify the most information we can collect, the overarching objective is to support an informed decision. We might be producing misinformation. This quote typifies a common break from statistical technique. It is called for DOS decisions to be overseen by a quant specialist. If we do not believe that the 10% responding are similar to 90% not responding, the quant specialist should pursue a combination of the following 6 remedies for thwarting non-response. Number 1. Prior to taking the sample, we stratify the sample based on likelihood to response if we know it. 2. Prior to taking the sample, we reserve some budget for the remedies below. 3. Prior to taking the sample, we make certain that we oversample in anticipation of non-response. This protects us from having too small of a sample size. Oversampling helps follow up techniques like post-stratification or weighting class adjustments. Also, it is useful if we are stuck assuming that the non-response is random or the bias is not negligible. Number 4, after sampling, post-stratify on the non-response and conduct a second round of sampling on the non-responders. 5, after sampling, explore the relationships between the responders and non-responders. 6, after sampling, applying a weighting class adjustments if applicable. Post-stratifying on non-response. Post-stratifying on non-response is one of the few remedies for the non-response problem. After post-stratifying, we select a second sample from the non-responders and follow up more aggressively. This can cost much more per sampling unit, so we plan for smaller second sample. There is an implicit assumption that the non-responders are different from the responders. That is, that the non-response did not occur at random. In the customer preference example above, suppose that there is more aggressive follow-up on the non-responders, will obtain a reasonable second sample from the 75% non-responding from the first time. We observe that their brand A preference is 60% of this instead of the 80% preference among responders. We can make more informed assumptions about the remaining non-responders. This approach facilitates more informed assumptions about the remaining non-responders, and it can dramatically improve our estimation. Panels, not to be confused with focus groups. A panel is a statistical analog to a focus group. The U.S. government successfully employs panels to provide much of the high-quality economic information leveraged in the business world, such as the consumer price, medical expenditures, panel surveys, MEPS, etc. A panel comprises a randomly selected set of individuals who are not allowed to influence each other. Panels are excellent at collecting information longitudinally over time. Panels offer protective from mixing, confounding trends over time with sample-to-sample variability. Section 10.4 DOE, Design of Experiments. Until there are experiments, I take no notice of anything that's done. William Stevenson. Design experiments are experience planned in advance. Ronald A. Fisher. During the course of running a business, we generate a plethora of great ideas worth pursuing as well as challenging problems requiring great solutions. DOE is the primary tool for inferring cause and effect relationships. It can corroborate previously held opinions and exploit new ideas to maximum effect. This powerful tool enables us to test adjustments to our business model without bringing the business to a halt, exhausting precious resources or risking our income stream. Alternatively, corporations often try out an idea by expensively changing the entire business model, no pilot test or mini experiment. It can take years to realize, or rather to admit to the new idea, while brilliant in conception, is bleeding the company dry. Experiments facilitate our planning for the future in order to avoid flying by the seat of our pants. We can design them to test numerous ideas in one batch. At the same time, we quantify how confident we are in the results that apply after the experiment is over. For difficult business problems, one underutilized approach is to employ a pilot test as the leading edge of the DOE. The pilot test collects this information needed for building the remainder of the DOE. Pilot tests facilitate taking the business to where it has never been before. 4 common failings plague business experiments. 1, an unwillingness to make a long-term investment when unwarranted. 2, prematurely terminating the experiment ahead of schedule. 3, changing one factor at a time instead of running them all at once. And number 4, failing to leverage a quant specialist to avoid the above shortcomings and many others. Quant specialist roles. Upon delegation, the first phase for the quant specialist is to tackle 6 interrelated questions. 1, what does the business need? 2, what is population? 3, what do we want to estimate? Typically, we want an interval estimate for our treatment effect. 4, what is it worth? 5, how are we going to measure the experimental units? 6, what effects do we need to consider? As a DOS, the first phase is usually straightforward or already completed. Again, this will at most require a kickoff meeting and some investigative work. However, the quant specialist should avoid the mistake of taking anything for granted. For the quant specialist, we propose the following considerations. 1, kickoff meeting, statement of objectives, population definition, measurement device. 2, experimental design. 3, training for those involved. 4, pilot test. 5, data collection. 6, data management. 7, data analysis. 8, presentation, business and or technical. 9, analytics-based decision. Experimental design. DOE provides an opportunity to be aggressive in estimating the relationships between factors that can control and a response. The response is that dependable variable which measures performance. For this discussion, we'll refer to the independent variables as known factors. These known factors in the experiment consist of treatments and blocks. The treatments are independent variables of interest that we can control. The blocks are independent variables that we can usually manipulate, but are not directly interesting. In addition, the factors we can observe or usually exert some control over. There are unobserved and often unknown factors. All experimental designs comprise 3 parts. Number 1, the treatment structure. 2, the design of EU, structure blocks, and 3, the error structure, unobserved factors. Concept box. Response. Dependent variable. The primary measure of performance, e.g., sales amount, attrition, response to product offering, etc. Moving on. 1, the set of treatments are randomly assigned to EUs. There are often restrictions on this randomization, which can be confusing to the uninitiated. However, this randomization is important protection from bias. Concept box. Treatments. Factors, variables of interest that we can manipulate randomly assigned to EUs, e.g. price, color, material composition of product can be treatments. Treatments and other variables have levels. These factors are often changes to product's process or to the business model. We regard a control group as one of the treatments, treatment 0. Blocks, known extraneous factors, variables for which we have no direct interest, but we can usually manipulate by grouping similar EUs in order to cancel out their bothersome effects, e.g. store region, month of year, type of customer, etc. can be blocks. Unknown factors, unknown extraneous factors, variables which we cannot assign to EUs. Instead, we employ randomization to cancel out their effects on the response. 2. The design structure consists of grouping EUs into homogeneous blocks to facilitate balanced treatments assignments. By grouping similar EUs into blocks, we can force the blocking variable to be balanced across the treatments. This cancels out the mixing or confounding of the effects so that we can untangle them. The treatment effects are said to be confounded with other treatments and blocks when we cannot separate their effect from those of other factors. 3. The error structure is a result of the design structure. We balance the unknown factors through randomization. Randomization protects us from confounding unknown or hidden factors which we will not measure directly. Concept box, experimental units, EUs. The smallest units upon which we assign treatments and observe the response. EUs are analogous to SUs. EUs, for example, EUs might be customers, household, business, etc. The population of EUs does not exist yet, unborn customers. Another concept box. Confounding. The problem of having the effects of factors intricately mixed. This occurs when factors change mostly in sync with each other. In such a situation, we cannot attribute an effect on the response with a change in one factor alone. The purpose of DOE is more precisely estimate treatment effects on the response by accounting for effects from other factors. To be successful, we, number 1, collect the appropriate data. 2, strive for efficiency. DOE employs an inductive approach for estimating causal relationships between treatments and the response variable. The design often applies the analysis, and the analysis is self-validating up to a point. The statistical diagnoses are integral to the experimental design. The purpose of any design is to measure how much EUs vary with the treatments. This is simple if everything is somehow held constant. The complete randomized design accounts for differences in unknown factors only. The randomized block design accounts for both known blocks and unknown factors. Next, we discuss the 2 common designs. Completely randomized design. The first design and most basic design assume that there are no block effects. It balances treatments to cancel out effects from unknown factors only. That is, EUs are homogeneous except for unknown factors. The first step is to randomly select EUs from the population. Next, we randomly assign treatments, TRTs, to EUs. The randomized balances the underlying unknown factors. For example, we could randomly assign one of our 4 possible marketing promotions to a sample of customers. Randomized block design. This design accounts for known extraneous factors, blocks, in addition to treatment and unknown factors. When we randomly select EUs, we place them in homogeneous groups or blocks. Next, we treat each block separately, randomly assigning different treatments to EUs within the block. This imposes treatment balance within each one block, canceling out block effects. Hence, we can more accurately estimate the relationships between the response and the treatment without interference from block effects. This approach constitutes a restriction on the randomization, which has been a source of confusion. Even with this restriction, the treatments are still randomly assigned to EUs, and this protects us from unknown factors. For example, we could segment our customers into high, medium, and low purchasing behavior and then randomly assign 1 or 4 possible marketing promotions to a sample of customers in each segment. Advanced experimental designs. There are numerous advanced designs built for all manner of needs. Advanced designs leverage additional information, pursue different objectives, and navigate barriers. Situations that merit advanced designs include screening a large number of factors to identify these stronger relations with the response, factorial designs, reducing EU effects, repeated measures, handling different EU sizes, splits plot, serving for optimal factor combinations, response service models, neutralizing EU differences, crossover designs, adjusting for EUs nested within EUs, nested designs, among others. We wish to cover one last situation. If there are too few EUs, then randomized no longer makes sense. A quant specialist should purposely assign treatments to EUs in a balanced, insightful manner, thus blocking them. Purposeful selection should only be applied by those competent enough to design a DOE. We are mentioning this as a form of sabotage for those not involving a quant specialist. Experimental platforms. Most corporations need an ongoing experimental platform to address their continuing needs, such as, number 1, monitoring the effects of new products and promotions in the marketplace, estimate ROIs. Number 2, testing new products offerings. We need to monitor more than overall market statistics. We need to monitor how our corporate strategy is working in the marketplace. An experimental platform needs to be nimble enough to test new business practices and measure ongoing practices. For example, we might need a control group of customers who are not receiving our primary marketing messages and so on. This enables us to estimate the overall benefits of our promotional efforts. This approach is more realistic in today's digital economy.